Right. Man, this has been wild. I'm on, then I'm off, then I'm on, and I'm off. It's like, come on, really? So we're gonna do it this way. You guys can hear me okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, hear very well.
That's what they say we don't hear him.
Yeah, that would totally freak me out.
Oh, Jack, I don't know about you, Mark. Jack, looks like your video's frozen. Are you seeing? Yeah.
He's gonna be frozen for a second.
Okay.
Yeah, it happens to all of us during the broadcast. Even we all get frozen. I freeze up. Then all of a sudden, this happens. So we are live, and it's a good thing, right? So welcome everybody. Welcome Job Seeker Nation. Thank you very much for joining us. This is Mark, and I always come on a little early just so that we can get on the system and get on LinkedIn and everything to flow through just right. Well, everything happens in 15 minutes not time. We can have a failure, then we can have success, and we don't worry about too much around here because all we matter is just trying to serve you guys. Welcome if you're joining us for the first time. My name is Mark. On the other end, you might see Jack, who's in freeze mode, but he can hear us. Okay. Yeah, you're still showing frozen, dude. But nevertheless, the show must go on. With us today is our special guest, Niato Bensian-Chill. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. What's good, Mark? Thank you for having me back. Thank you, Jack, as well, for inviting me onto your platform. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. And if you want to find out more about him, find out through his link. Also, you can go to avenircareers.com. That's correct?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's correct. Thank you.
Hot dog. I just want to be sure we get this right.
Yeah.
And Jack, you're doing okay, sir?
I don't know. Am I still frozen or okay?
You're spotty, and I know you have to leave a little early, so we're gonna try to jump in right away and get down to it. And you can find Jack at WeRecruiter.io, and you can also follow his stuff. He writes very frequently for Forbes, and he probably writes about an article a day. So
I should do that. Yeah.
stay tuned for what Jack has in store. In the meantime, let's get started. Flex Jobs did a survey recently of 2,100 folks, and most are facing burnout. More than half, 56%, said they experienced burnout during the pandemic, and 39% said their mental health is worse today than it was January of 2020. And I want to know from you guys, and Nyato, we're going to start with you because you also have a mental health background and a master's in mental health, of course. Much respect, of course, and this is going to be helpful for this discussion. How have you seen that manifest itself in the way that people are handling their job search?
Sure. I mean, I'll start with myself as a provider. And during the pandemic, I've had to take on multiple roles I never had to before, and I'm sure many of us have, especially if you got young children at home. I happen to have a 9-year-old daughter who's been doing virtual third grade. Actually, well, she finished second grade virtually and has done the entire third grade year virtually as well. And so I find myself playing career coach during the day, but in addition, I'm hall monitor. I'm also tech support. I'm also, a secondary assistant teacher. And so just these additional layers of responsibility were added onto my day-to-day plate that were not there prior to the pandemic, when my child could go into school and I could focus purely on my own work. And so that, I believe, is a situation that's very relevant to many job seekers out there. And so it makes it much more difficult to attend to the needs of your job search when you might have a child of any age. Of course, teenagers are a bit more independent, but they still need support, maybe to stay on task and what have you. And so it's already stressful enough to handle a job search, the uncertainty, the questioning of your value and what you have to offer. Will someone, hire you? All those issues are ongoing. And in addition, you're working from home and trying to take care of your household in addition to running a full-time job search. And that's a big burden that people haven't had to juggle in the same manner before.
Yeah. How about you, Jack? How have you seen it
I
manifest?
can appreciate it. It's funny. My kids are older too, so
Hmm.
uh, it's hard to remember when they were that age, but it's a lot. It's a lot to juggle. A job, your own job, your partner or son's job, having
Hmm.
young kids. The public schools here in New York and New Jersey were closed a lot, so that
Yep.
it was just it's rough. So I can see how I find it hard for people not to get burned out and frustrated and stressed
Hmm.
out. I think it just takes an incredible mentally strong person not to let it get to you. So I think that this is something that's real serious. And one of the, I think, positive aspects of the pandemic is for the first time, I think in my lifetime, I noticed that we're actually talking about these issues. Previously, in our society, let's be frank, it's not, you don't really talk about it. You say to somebody, how you doing? They're, always, oh, I'm doing great, everything's fine, and you don't want to discuss it. And now it's kind of coming to the forefront, which long term, I think is going to be good for everybody.
Yeah, yeah, I really have seen it. It's similar to what I don't know in a different kind of way, and I relate back to my experience when I was doing outplacement for a third party a consulting firm as a consultant. As a lot of the army bases were closing, that were house federal employees back in 2010 to the end of 2011, almost, and a little bit in 2012. But all that said, a lot of not PTSD as far as like when people go to war, but when people have felt the burden of layoff or on the verge of layoff or the anticipation of feeling that something's going to happen. And the funny thing is that there were some people who had the feeling of that the government's going to save them, and the government didn't at that particular time. And I think with all the things that have happened precursor to 2020 and how things have unfolded politically, I think there's some people who kind of waiting for people to save them, and for people to for people waiting for something to happen. And I think we see part of that anxiousness when we saw uh, the stimulus checks and the anticipation of that, and waiting for hiring to happen more often. And then now we're getting a lot of mixed signals, because there's also the fact that we talked about last week, Jack, about how people are turning down jobs because they're getting a little bit more stimulus. So there's all kinds of things, I think, not only just from the job seeker side, but from professionals who kind of been waiting in the wings and looking forward to also saving, getting out of their current job, because they found out in crisis, like most people do, that they found out, man, this company really sucks. So, I think there's those myriad of feelings. And maybe for you, Niatu, you can talk a little bit about some of the things that or you don't have to give all the anti, of course, you're a mental health professional, but just kind of gives a flavor of some of the things that you've said that help people overcome and to move forward with their lives in the job search.
Sure. Before I jump into that answer, I do want to take you up on your point about PTSD.
Mhm.
You sharing that even though you were trying to be careful not to go into that territory, I
Yeah.
think it's an accurate diagnosis, if you like, what's going on.
Mhm.
If we think about the impact of the pandemic, everyone's lives were completely upended worldwide.
Mhm.
And we were thrown into a situation that none of us had ever faced before. So everything's unknown and new. And
Mhm.
in normal circumstances, new things can be a little bit anxiety provoking and scary, let alone a global pandemic where people's lives are literally on the line of being lost. And
Mhm.
so PTSD or trauma is a very real thing that we are seeing through the pandemic, and we'll continue to see the effects of coming out of the pandemic, because people lost people. There's just massive loss. There's loss of jobs, there's loss of income, stability, and all the knock-on effects of losing work. And there's also loss of loved ones that took place during this time as well. And we can't skate by that from a mental health perspective, from a human perspective. This happened. And so to flesh out my earlier answer, job seekers might also be dealing with, I lost my uncle, or my father just died, or my brother just died, but I'm still looking for a job. How can one, properly navigate or easily navigate that process when there's a heavy emotional burden and toll going on, but somehow they got to show up and present themselves well on a Zoom call or Zoom interview? Meanwhile, they recently, suffered a significant passing in their family, or they've been looking for work for 6 months because they lost their job at the beginning of the pandemic. And so these are real impacts that people have been facing, and that we as a society, as fellow humans, should take into account as we think about what people have had to deal with during this job search. I just want to throw that, insert that into the conversation. As far as moving forward, I wrote an article a few months ago about the benefits of seeking therapy in relation to your job search. Not that it's literally job search therapy, but it's going to therapy and using as a place to process what you're going through in order to show up better during your job search. And so with my mental health counseling training, I'm a huge proponent for therapy, and encouraging people to seek it, advocating to destigmatize it, and looking to support people in finding different pathways for access. I was listening to a WNYC, New York's NPR station yesterday morning, and I heard that CVS is piloting in Philadelphia, I think Miami, and maybe one other city, that you can go get mental health counseling services at your local CVS. And that feels like a game changer because therapists are booked. And this is another route for, I'm hoping, is low cost access to mental health services. And so if you're currently employed, I'd encourage you to take advantage of your EAP program, employee assistance programs. If you have health insurance through your employer, I'm covered through my wife's employer. And so I haven't had to have a copay for my therapy services since August of last year when I found my current therapist, I should say. And then of course there's resources like Talkspace, and then, what's the other one? BetterHelp, that offer online and text-based therapy options. And so I'm just throwing these out there. I have no affiliation or sponsorship deals, anything like that.
Right.
I want people to have, full access to these resources. And I just highly encourage people to take advantage and don't job search alone. Job search groups are really helpful and useful, and people who search together get better results and get faster results through emotional support, sharing resources, tips, things like that. And so these are a couple ways I'll throw out there for individuals facing challenges in their job search to overcome, while also dealing with the mental burden of searching during this time frame.
Yeah, Jack, how about on your end? You have special clientele that you serve, and I'm sure you've heard things come out of people's mouths that you might have been surprised. And how did you handle them?
But I'm in the direction of the gentleman going towards, because I agree. One of the reasons I think, and I don't need to support it, but the long-term unemployed, I think a lot of them are going through that, post-traumatic stress, or whatever you call it. Because how many times can you apply for a job, hear back, go for an interview, get ghosted, spend day after day after day sending applications, nothing. A day goes by, a week, a month. It has to get to you. It has to wear you down. And then when I find out, to answer your question, Mark, what happens is then when they interview, you can feel they're wearing it. That it's hard to shed that skin. It's hard to then turn around and say, hey, it's great to meet you. I'm really glad to be here, when you're not feeling it. It's hard. And not many people are capable of doing it. And I think what ends up happening, and they go down that slippery slope. And you do hear it. You hear what they say, how they act, how they comport themselves. I'll get feedback from hiring managers and say, hey, really nice, but he seemed a little angry and bitter in the last job experience. And for most people, we're not actors and actresses. You don't know how to turn and how, when they say action, to all of a sudden become a difference. So they're wrestling with it. I think I'm with you. I think they're, going to therapy, seeing people, seeing a professional. If you keep going and looking for jobs, it's not happening, you're getting frustrated, you're getting angry, you take your spouse or your kids or your family and friends, it's time to maybe take a pause and say, I need some help. I need some talk to, whether professionally or somebody you trust now. Because it just gets worse. It doesn't get, it's hard to get better. So I'm really glad that you guys brought it up, because I see this all the time, and it's not really my purview to say to somebody, a candidate, or maybe it is, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. It's an awkward kind of situation to say to somebody, hey, I think you need help. Because then you come up to the car. You know what I mean? So it's something, once again, to go back to saying, it's good that we're discussing this, so people who are watching the future, and people think it's just that. You know, they think, oh, I'm the only one going through this, everyone else is having a good time. And why not? Because when they look at Facebook, they look on Instagram, they look on Twitter, people showing their best times. And so they feel, it's just me, wow, it's terrible. But when they hear conversations like this, real conversations, honest conversations, it makes them say, wait, all right. And I think there's a relief there too, where it's like, oh, it's not just me, God. That alone makes me feel better. So this is, I'm really glad that both of you you're talking about it, because I think it's so important. So important.
Yeah, if I could just jump in, Mark, real quick. On Jack made some excellent points, and he made me remember something that one of my professors in grad school was talking about. Her name is Dr. Annika Warren. She's absolutely brilliant. And she was exploring this concept of leaking or leakage that we have as humans. And that is our emotions that are beneath the surface seeping through, perhaps in situations where we wouldn't ideally want them to seep through. And so I think that's what Jack was alluding to when he is, screening candidates, and they might be a great candidate, on paper, they might present relatively well, but because we're human and we, can sense vibes, we get a feel for people, especially in person. And I guess we're getting practice at getting vibes through this medium right here, virtually. He might be sensing something below the surface that's not quite right. They might be sad or depressed. They might be angry, have some resentment. There's something that's coming through somehow that Jack is able to pick up on, and other hiring managers might also pick up on when interviewing potentially highly qualified, great candidates. And so for you, Jack, I don't know if you need to tell them, I think you need help. If there's someone that you're playing the intermediary for and might be moving them on to interview with the employer, it might be saying, hey, I feel like I can sense something's going on, with you right now. Would you be open to sharing me what that is, right? And they might be able to reveal, what's going on or what they're carrying with them. And that could open a dialogue between the two of you that might allow you to assist them, or not to say you're going to play their therapist, to be clear, but at least opening the door for that conversation. And that might lead to them understanding or realizing, hey, maybe I need to talk to a good friend about this, or maybe I do need to go to therapy because this thing's just not going away. So I think that was a brilliant observation. And I just want people out there listening to understand that if you're carrying things with you that you haven't dealt with just yet that are impacting you, they may come out in situations where you don't want them to. Because as Jack said, we're not actors. We can't just turn it on, lights, camera, action. But when you are interviewing, to a degree, it is a performance. Of course, you're showing up as your full authentic self, but this is a version of yourself that is trying to get a job and trying to appear a certain way. And it might be hard to turn that on or turn that dial up if you're dealing with some significant baggage of loss or what have you showing up that day.
Yeah, I think the realness of this situation has brought out one thing, and that's the way we feel about work. For a lot of people, work was that extended family. For others, it wasn't. It was a joy to go remote and not deal with people. But the other half is people felt a sense of loss, and the sense of loss of relationships. And some people had to move on, whether it was through the COVID or a victim of being COVID positive, or whether it's the distance that you face and used to having the hugs, the high fives, the bumps, the fist bumps, and all those things that made you feel like, man, this is somewhere I feel secondary to my regular family, or even to your first family. There are people who feel like the co-workers are the best family and most reliable families that they ever had. So there's that aspect as well. And I think that truly come out how much work really means to us. And because people get it in one of two ways, they feel like this means more to me than just something I do for a living and for a check. I need to find somewhere else to reconnect so I can have that I can have the best of both worlds, or that I miss that, I long for that, and I really need to go back into the office, if anything, just to have that human touch that I love so much and cherish so much. So all those things, I think, play a big factor. Jack?
You know, why it's so interesting because, you know, I think a lot of people go this too. When it falls on your shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll give just a personal experience from just right before this call. So I'm set up. So not only do you have to do what you do for a living, but you have to figure out the light, you have to figure out the camera, you have to figure out where you sit. And then there comes out like, no, this is work. The connection isn't working that well. You know, I'm moving around to get where's the best thing, and then all of a sudden, I'll test it with the folks in my, you know, we're all working remotely. We have a Google chat. And I'm like, asking, how is it? And I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I'm literally like, this is so frustrating. I'm calling out to my son because he's all, Jay, can you come over? I don't care. Come over here. And that's your point, you know, when it comes out. Like, you know, I'm a pretty calm guy, actually. Like, you know what? You can't help it at times. Like, come on, just get up here and help me with this. It's so frustrating. And I'm not experiment on it easy. But I think that's not about either. It's just little, it's like, I think for a lot of people, it's like you have little gnats around you all day long. Mm-hmm. Think about it. It's like all day long, little gnats just biting you, annoying you, day in, day out. So you don't even sometimes get the big stuff we talked about earlier. Sometimes just a little belly frustration, just most people are just on their own doing it. And then if you pile onto it, like you were talking about a 9-year-old child and a spouse or partner or whatever, and you have to deal with everything, it can kind of really wear you down. So that's what I think we're all dealing with.
Yeah, it's quite an emotional hike. Did you want to add any last words to this, Niacho, before we move on?
I think I'd just say that we need to lead with more empathy, especially coming from employers as they are interviewing folks for new job opportunities, and take into account the truly, you know, global nature of what just took place, and that it impacted everyone, and also keep in mind impacted everyone differently. There's some people who kind of skated through, and not to, you know, dismiss any potential challenges they might have had, but some people's quality of life, you know, was either unchanged or got better because now they have $10,000 more in the bank than they did, you know, before the pandemic began, because, you know, that's how their life worked out. And there are others who've experienced tremendous loss of life, of income, and different things like that. And so I think employers should try to be more empathetic to the challenges that people have faced. And then when they're interviewing someone, there may be issues with their connection, with things like that are literally not in their control. You know, it could have been working fine yesterday, but today it's just not working. And they shouldn't be faulted for technical glitches when, you know, Comcast, or what are they, Spectrum now? I remember having a Spectrum at my old job, and they were terrible. They're absolutely awful service providers. But, you know, that's what we have to deal with. And so, you know, I think just, you know, injecting the human element as much as possible into the proceedings right now is the last word I'll say on that, and just being kind and empathetic.
Yeah, I really think that there's a lot of things.
I'm sorry, I just have to jump.
Okay, all right, Jack. Jack's gonna.
I'll come right back. I got to do business.
Okay, all right, all right. Yep,
all right.
Yep. Go ahead. We'll
I'll see you guys later.
All right.
All right, sounds good. This is keeping it real, right?
Yes, right. Yep, that's what we do around here. We're flexible. There are times when Jack or I had bleeped out technically, and then we had to try to find our way back in. So, you know,
Gotcha.
that's just all part of the game. We could talk a little bit about Jack's article while he's on. He brought up a very interesting article, and I think there's some layers of discussion we can have on this. Is the fact that there's the idea that people will be looked at people will be looked at differently, and there might be two classes of people: those who work remote and those who work in the office. And perhaps maybe there might be a hybrid in some companies, but we just kind of wonder how all that's going to work out. And I'm just wondering your thoughts on what that may look like in the office when perhaps some of your favorite people or someone's favorite person may be remote, or that the communication isn't as streamlined as it was if we were all in the office, or we're all on remote. Do you think that that's going to be a hazard of some type, Nyato?
Jack's article was excellent. And for anyone
Mhm.
listening, the article is called Remote Work Study Shows the Possibility of a New Corporate Two-Class System. It's on Forbes.com. And it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a new dance that employers and employees are going to have to learn the steps of together, neither of them knowing, what the right moves actually are, if that metaphor makes sense. No
Right.
one's really done this to this extent before. Yes, there's been remote work for quite some time, but not remote work as a result of pandemic and then figuring out coming back into the office when the world of work is completely shifted in that direction when it comes
Right.
to quote unquote white collar jobs that all you need is a laptop to perform your function.
Mhm.
I think it's quite possible because the human factor is always there. We have biases, we have preferences, whether voiced or not voiced, implicit or explicit, that are going to creep up when the choice to go return to office comes up and the employer provides the option of staying home.
Mhm.
Those who come into the office, it's quite possible, as Jack alludes to, that they'll be seen as being more dedicated to their work. Their presence will mean that they have more face time with senior executives who may also be more likely to be in office as leadership.
Right.
And so the dynamics change in terms of communication, exposure, and then the concept of FaceTime, right, is going to change as well. We
Right.
all know the FaceTime concept in the office. You stay till 5:30 or 6. Everyone stays till 5:30 or 6. What does that look like when half your staff is remote and half your staff is in the office? Jack
Mhm.
alludes to, is it going to be monitoring software to make sure the remote workers are on when they say they're on and things like that. And so
Mhm.
it's bring up a lot of questions in terms of how people will be perceived, how people will be evaluated, and how relationships will form or change based on presence or absence from the office. And so it could get really tricky. And I think it'll take a lot of intentional thought and conversation to put structures in place that don't automatically discriminate or put at a disadvantage individuals who choose to stay home for whatever reason they choose to continue remote working. And so, when we're thinking about tech, we think about how you have these incredibly brilliant people who create the algorithms and things like that, but maybe their training or their background doesn't have the humanities aspect to think about what are the consequences of this technology we're creating. And so I feel like this is a similar situation where you have to have the technological, procedural, analytical side present to figure out the how of it all. But then you need that humanistic side to figure out, well, what are the ramifications of this new structure to make sure that people don't get left out and it remains an inclusive process and not one
Mhm.
that discriminates.
Yeah, you bring up some very valid points. In one part of the article, and I'm just going to read what it says. It says skeptical managers may start deploying invasive surveillance technologies, which I think they do anyway, on computers at home with employees to ensure that they are actually working. The remote employees may grow resentful of this type of micromanaging to trust. I think that's actually happening anyway, but I think there's a dynamic that's almost similar to that of people being at home versus at work. Is a difference between, I don't know if you ever work with a company that is 24 hours, you have a night shift and a day shift, and
Mm-hmm.
each of them feel like they're favoring the one or the other, and usually the night shift is the one that feels being slighted because the day shift has access to all of the the lunches, the meetings, and the information highway, which travels faster on the day shift than it does at night. And very often,
Mm-hmm.
the night shift is often neglected in that sense
Mm-hmm.
because they're not in the building with the managers who make the quick decisions and don't really get the spirit of any encouragement that might come from there.
Mm-hmm.
Or the other half is that they want to maybe also avoid the toxic situation at work where
Mm-hmm.
you have
Mm-hmm.
the managers and things like that who are on the day shift and just spread toxicity, while at night is much more peaceful and you're gonna have people watching over your shoulder. I think there are similarities in working the remote versus working in the office, and those two exposures is basically the access. And I think the smarter leadership is going to be really thoughtful on how people manage and how people will gravitate towards the shift depending upon, one, I think their work habits, but I think also their preference in their relationships with other people. So I
Mm-hmm.
think all of that comes into play. I want to just take a timeout second to recognize some of the people who've commented. Trevor Phillips, thanks very much. It resonated with the last discussion. Annette says she'll catch the replay because I think she has a live that she does on Clubhouse. So thanks, Annette, for chiming in. Paula says, I love the discussion around remote in-office dynamics in a post-COVID world. It's going to be so interesting. Yes, it will. And I think some companies may live or die on how they'll manage that and how they'll be able to help. Can they make everybody thrive? If one lags behind the other, there's going to be some problems. And really, if you look at the studies, especially the latest Job Bite study, which they said people are far more productive at home than they are in the office. So the productivity often leads to the reaping of rewards. And that's where it gets a little tricky ground, especially depending upon the tools and things that are needed on the job.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some really wonderful points, and you sharing the using the metaphor of the day shift versus the night shift is an
Mhm.
interesting lens to apply to this conversation. One thing that came to mind when you shared that information about the image of the information sort of highway or superhighway during the day
Mhm.
versus the night. I thought about information asymmetry. If
Mhm.
someone's in the office, you are going to be able to have those little interactions that are part of the context of being in an office environment. You can walk to your bosses or your colleagues cube or office and have a conversation. You bump into someone in the hallway, have a quick chat, or the water cooler chat, quote unquote. Those that ability is lost when you work remote, and so there will be things you just won't know or won't be up on or hip to because you're not in the office, and that can have potentially cumulative effect in terms of you being in an information deficit as the remote worker if you're
Mhm.
not looped in very intentionally to those things. And of course, those conversations might not be transmitted, formally to someone who at home might benefit from it. That's going to be an additional work stream for someone to have to take care of. And
Mhm.
so how do we best weave together the at-home workforce with the in-office workforce in a way that doesn't disadvantage those outside the office? What was interesting between two articles you shared for us to take a look at, in Jack's, he mentioned that UK study showing that remote workers worked more but
Mhm.
reaped less rewards, studying, I think, 10 years worth of remote work in terms of promotion, things like that. Their survey from Flex Jobs that you shared said that remote workers did not feel like they're going to lose out on opportunities for promotion. I think I had the stat here. Yeah, it's a 70% say remote work has not impacted their chances of promotion, and 15% felt it helped or greatly enhanced their chances of promotion.
Mhm.
Um, it's possible that the pandemic could have a positive effect in terms of people being able to talk about how they innovated through the pandemic, and that could potentially very well lead to help them get a promotion in this current environment. However, as we move further, beyond the pandemic, once that's officially over, whenever that day arrives,
Right.
and we have this true dichotomy between work and home, will those potential advantages of maybe being able to work a bit longer from home, having to innovate because of COVID, or maybe innovating because you work from home, what are the boundaries of that, and where will that stop in terms of boosting your career versus those who are in office and will be able to revert back to the traditional system of gaining visibility, having the ear of the leadership team and the visibility of with them, getting higher profile projects because you're in the office and hear about things first versus the person at home. And so these are things that we really need to start thinking about considering as we shift in this direction, and think about how to make it equitable. That's the word. How can we make it equitable when we have a divided workforce at home versus in office?
Yeah, yeah. When you said asymmetry, I think about, and I think there's a good analogy. And in fact, you got the bodybuilder who works the upper body so well,
But he's got
and
chicken
doesn't
legs.
work the lower body really well. It looks kind of
Right.
funny. But I think that
Yeah.
it's real that people will get into those situations. Or if you listen to hip hop, somebody who has a gangster beat, but the lyrics are really lame. It makes
Yeah.
me think of some people, but I'm not going to go down that road. But I think
Yeah, that's a whole other
ultimately,
conversation about hip
that's a
hop
whole
today.
nother
Don't get me started.
conversation. But I think all just the same, people will look and people will wonder, but people will look and wonder for the wrong reasons. And they'll look around and say, well, the upper body is doing great, but the lower body's kind of lagging. And, working home, either one of you exchange one for the other is the company's not going to be perceived as not doing well in either case, because you don't have complementary parts working together. And
Yeah.
very often is that rule of compensation, where if one leg really hurts and is damaged, but you didn't fix it, then you got to rely on the other one, and eventually that's
Right.
going to go down too. So I think there's a lot of scenarios that will play out throughout the years. But I think one of the things that relates to job seekers is that they're going to really need to really dig now for real into people and the situations and the cultures and what it's like in both places. And they're going to need to talk to more than one person to get an idea which side of the fence you're going to be on, because you don't want to be on the skinny leg side, so to speak. You want to be on the built side, or you may be apprehensive because the sides are asymmetric.
Yeah, no, that's a great point about the importance of leveraging people, and perhaps even more now, to understand what a company or what an employer's workplace culture has been as far as remote work. Because companies responded with different levels of effectiveness, of support, of speed in adapting to the remote work environment. And it'd be important for a job seeker right now to get a good understanding of how well supported remote workers feel by employer X. And that's wonderful advice to try and speak to as many people as possible. One thing that I advise is try to do informational interviews with current employees, but also try and reach out to former employees to find out what their take is. They would have less investment in painting a rosier picture of an employer because they no longer have a stake. They don't work there anymore, and they may provide more candid feedback about an employer's true nature. And if you're able to compare and contrast the feedback of a current versus former employee, if they match, beautiful. That means that the culture, as stated, is in reality what is practiced. And that's a great way to get a feel. But if there's a mismatch, that might be a red flag. You might want to avoid that company and look elsewhere in terms of your search efforts.
Yeah. And also you get an idea too, and we'll all get an idea of how some of this may publicly played out, because people will voice their dissatisfaction in one way or another, even if it's in a passive sense of how things are going. And I think people need to start to take more attention to that, and not just say that, oh, somebody shouldn't be complaining, blah, blah, blah. Somebody does, very often, especially when you've got this kind of work dynamic, that might be it might be a legitimate red flag. Now, I'm not saying you should take that person's message. You should dig deeper into what's being said. But having said that, sometimes these things are are deep and may have extended back before the COVID actually happened, because
Right, for sure.
COVID exposed stuff. That was
Yes.
already there. It didn't
Hmm.
create new problems. It exposed stuff, and it made a bunch of people outliers, because of all the people who said and turned down people who said, we're not looking for remote because we're not going
Right.
remote. And then you end up going remote, and it's like,
Right.
oh, okay. And they'll just go with the people who first stated, like Microsoft and Google. They say, yeah, we're going to be remote for a couple of years, or we're going to be
Hmm.
remote forever. Like I think it was Twitter. And big companies are, they suck up a lot of the bandwidth as far as our attention, and how
Hmm.
and what leadership looks like, and what people would think would be a great workplace. And a
Hmm.
lot of that's going to be thrown out the window, because you got to look now. The great workplace isn't the ping pong table and lunch during lunchtime. Is going to
Hmm.
be, do I want to work at home where they are very comfortable, they'll lose, or work at work where all the big wigs are and they don't know how to use a computer?
Right. Yeah, that brings up a really interesting point about just the you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube is what just
That's
happened.
correct. Yeah.
And so yeah, all those arguments about remote work not being possibility, or being too difficult, or productivity suffering, that's all out the window right now.
Yeah.
And it has been interesting to see the larger companies, take like Twitter, take a lead in saying we're just going to be fully remote. And what is that going to do to the arms race that has been going on, as far as the
Yep.
gigantic companies having these great corporate campuses? You never want to leave because you can get free coffee, a
Hmm.
free sushi with a Japanese classically trained chef,
Right.
all this stuff. Where is that going to be reinvested now that being in the office is no longer necessarily a thing? And it'll be interesting to see how smaller companies will adapt and to this new reality, because they don't necessarily have the resources that a Google or a Twitter has to perhaps set up every single one of the employees with the optimal,
Hmm.
equipment needed to work from home. Not
Yeah.
every company can do that, and then not every employee would be in the position to go and upgrade their own home workspace, if they can
Hmm.
even have a designated home workspace.
Right.
I happen to be in my bedroom today, but during the before my wife went back into the office after she got promoted, which is dope. I love my wife; she's great.
Yeah.
And I was out on in the dining table for the majority of the pandemic. That was my office, was the dining table, while
Hmm.
she was in here as a clinical director, having to do calls that required privacy. And so what does that look like, when remote work is permanent, and, individuals and families have to just really adapt their workspaces, and all of that. And so, I mean, this is a fascinating conversation, and I'm sure we could go forever. And I'm even thinking about the HR implications, in terms of
Hmm.
evaluation, talent development, succession planning, and of course, recruitment. How are these all going to be impacted as a result of trying to reintegrate into a physical work environment and still having people opt to work from home? There's so much to consider.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this would be a perfect time to kind of go into actionable tips to help people get their next job in May. One of the two things, both things that we kind of caution, is that people really need to check in with their mental health, and to really get a good idea of what they're doing and how they're doing, because that's going to matter to an employer, how you're able to do and how you got over stress. As you said, people can see under layers how you handled it when they come to you. And there's going to be people coming in and out, to where an employer is going to be able to smell in a hot second who has handled it really well and who hasn't
Mhm.
handled it really well. And do you feel like that's going to be a snag too for and a snag for people coming in May, as they start to go about interviewing? And some people are actually starting to get interviews and getting to the last of the interviews, much less some of them being 7, 8, 10 interviews, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm gonna quickly flip it for a second and say
Okay.
that job seekers should ask questions of employers in terms of how they supported their employees during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
From a mental health standpoint, an emotional standpoint, from a social justice standpoint, especially for our BIPOC job seekers out there. There's a lot that's happened in the past year and is still ongoing. We're in the immediate aftermath of the George Floyd case outcome, but there have been 3 or 4 killings, shootings since then. That's real for a Black person of color to be contending with emotionally and mentally as they're looking for a job, not to mention the pandemic, job search stress, and all of that. So ask the employer how they support their employees. But then from the employee standpoint, the job seeker standpoint, I mean, it is, because looking for a job is a bit of it's an audition, right? If we want to use the acting metaphor, it really is an audition. And people who actually are actors, they know the level of rejection and where it can come from. Could be anything. Your hair isn't the right look. You wore the wrong clothes that day. You messed up one line or one word in your monologue, and that's it. It can feel that arbitrary in a job search, but how you show up to every engagement, whether it's networking or formal interview, really does matter. And so I always do counsel people to try and check in on themselves as much as possible before launching a job search. Now, I'll get into more details about that in a moment after I turn it back to you. But also, it's important for them to try and get the support that they need, whether it's through self-care, whatever self-care looks like to you. Make it an intentional practice during your job search. If you've got to schedule it in so you treat it like an appointment. And those things will help you to show up as your best self as often as possible. We're not going to be perfect, but you just want to give yourself your best opportunity that you can to show up as your best self each time. So I agree with that. It could be a snag if it's not attended to.
Well, yeah, and I think for employers, they really have to start to unwrap that the BIPOC community are micro communities as well. And splintered into many different forms, but they're also close knit community as a whole. Now, take the Black community for instance, and I've shared this on Facebook a couple of times, and it really was a revelation that for us, a lot of performers, we could say Aretha, or we could say Gladys, or we could say Michael, or we could say Marvin, and everybody in that community know exactly what it is. And I think other communities do too, but there isn't a lot of, so when we see someone who looks like us, who it appears, and most of the time has been wrong shootings, and not sliding anybody. I'm just saying, that's like losing a family member, and that also puts you on alert and notice. So you come to work with this heightened awareness, and you come with, and somewhat defensive and skeptical, and you don't even know why. You look at the person as well as not that person, but you just feel like you also are looking to protect your community. But having said that, I think that people really need to look very carefully and deeply at what communities at work are going to be important to them, because they may have to choose the ones where maybe that might be faster tracking your career, but not with the support that you hope to have as finding people who look like you, or for the fact that there are other support, but may not move along as fast. And that's not to say, but there's going to be a lot of different splinters when we're coming up on this whole remote and office discussion, is that who's at home and who's at work, and also what community identifies with the way I want to work. And it becomes much more complicated. And what we're ultimately saying, you and I are saying, is that you can no longer dismiss and just take for granted that you're going to be physically somewhere, or that you're going to be remote somewhere. Where you are and where people like-minded who are like and who you want to work with will matter more than it ever has before.
Yeah, no, I definitely hear that. And I think that's something you and I align on very much so, is encouraging job seekers to look to their values when they are conducting their job search. It's really important to, and I'll preach this till I'm, blue in the face, as they say, that you should check in with what your values are prior to launching a job search. Again, I will cop to the fact that it's a bit of a privilege. If you need a job yesterday, go get that job yesterday. But
Yeah.
if you have the ability to take a step back, or at very least in parallel, consider what your priorities are and your values are, that will inform your job search and hopefully produce better results, because you land in an environment that is more supportive of what your needs and your values are. And doing that work will help you identify employers who will support, validate, and perhaps even perpetuate the values that you find most important, and would make it an environment within which you have a better chance of doing well for the long term.
Absolutely. And I think that people will also, and job seekers will have to also understand that some of these searches are going to be long.
Hmm.
They're going to be long. I mean, we hear about the jobs, employers are looking for more employees, especially the lower end jobs. But the higher end professionals, they might be they're going to face some competition. It's interesting how we see when the job market, when the unemployment's high, then we got a lot of people on the road driving in the same direction. But when the job market is also small, that is a narrow space, but we're all trying to compete for that same space and to hold
Right.
that space. So in either way, it's going to be very competitive, and you have to compete at the level that where whatever your industry is, you're going to have to be willing to peak at that level. So you also got to know what other people are doing with their job search and how they're winning over employees. And I think you should start. Job seekers need to start listening very carefully to what's being said in their industry. And if you don't feel like you have an industry, you have an industry. That industry has chosen you, and you not choosing the industry. And I think that's a big difference in how people approach their job search, because there are people who are perceived that unfortunately, a lot of people look at them and they say, well, they're not really skilled labor, so to speak. And that's kind of unfair, because some people weren't able to get the labor that they were skilled for.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of that discussion that's going to be parsed out, and I'm wondering how it's going to be played out here over the next few months until the end of the year. But the other part too I want to bring up is that people give up too soon in their job search. And what I mean is 6 months is a long time, and according to JobBite, there are more people who are unemployed 6 to 12 months than any other amount of people. But I think people need to realize when you've been ousted, or have been laid off, or you've been fired, or whatever, 12 month is almost normalized in some sense, especially coming up here, because there's going to be more fallout. There's going to be more impact that people will feel even as vaccines happen. I think
Hmm.
more people will get to work, but I think there'll be more people who will also be shut out because they're not sure how to job search and how to hang in there and how to endure all the turbulence that's going to be out there now.
Yeah, yeah, and the tips that I wanted to share as far as not getting snagged or making mistakes in one's upcoming search is number one. I think it's really important to take stock of the lessons you learned from any previous job searches that you've done.
Hmm.
I think that too often job seekers will repeat the same mistakes of past job searches because they haven't taken the time to sit down and reflect on, okay, this worked well for me, but this didn't work for me at all. How can I avoid falling to this same trap and do things differently in this new upcoming
Hmm.
job search? And so I think taking a little bit of time to reflect on what worked. How did you land your next job? What doors did you open? What locks unlocked and fell into place that allowed you to get into your last opportunity?
Hmm.
Analyze that pathway and to try to figure out what things you want to keep doing and things you need to stop and things you need to start doing anew is a great way to start off a job search or correct your job search from whatever track it's on right now. Secondly, I always ask my potential clients in our consultation calls, what challenges or concerns do you have for your upcoming job search? And by asking that question, for me, it's about getting to understand what's really on their mind so I can support them better. But for them, it's about bringing awareness to an issue that they believe could be a stumbling block for their job search so we can start to address it from an early point. And so if you're worried about not having a certain skill set, not having a particular type of experience, not having worked in a certain industry before, by naming it, and identifying what that challenge or concern is, you can now take the corrective steps or actions needed to mitigate or solve for it, either at the beginning of your job search, or it's something you can work on throughout your job search, leading hopefully to a great final result. And the final tip that I'll share, leading back to what you're talking about with increased competition, is for job seekers to really try and figure out what their unique value proposition is. What can you do that someone else equally qualified as you cannot do? And that's more so in the way that you do it. So it's asking yourself the question, what am I really good at, but how do I do it differently? And that second part of the question is the key. And so if you are brilliant at data analysis, what are the stories that you can extract that no one else is able to extract from the data? That might be the lane that you run in to distinguish yourself from other people who are equally brilliant data scientists. And so it's really trying to interrogate that question that can hopefully help you stand apart in the job search and ultimately, achieve success, which is landing your job.
Yeah. Those are all excellent tips. And I think one common thread is that people need to concentrate on making people the center of the job search, not processes and things that are automated, thinking that, the more I apply, the better chance I get. We keep, I find myself over the past 10 years of being in the game, having to repeat that very bit of advice, 11, 12 years now, but having to say that almost every single time, that people are thinking that it is easier to apply to a bunch of jobs and to make it happen. Unfortunately, that's the most inefficient way to look for jobs, because now I can get, if you want to talk to 100 people, I can get with that, because you can get a lot of intel out of that. That probably will increase your chances better and even make your job search shorter, because then you're not just taking it for now, taking a bit of what you talked about. You can learn from from other people now and apply it later. If it doesn't work out, that person doesn't refer you. But all that to say that the more likely you're going to get the best job and stay at that job, be more comfortable by having referrals and having more than one person other than the person referring you to be a coworker to help support you and help you think more big picture, and funnel that down to the specific task, rather than having to guess that that people are going to actually give you something. And in today's working world, it's competitive from that sense, that people are not going to do your job for you, and it's never going to be the case. So think that way about your job search. People are not going to do your job search for you. The more you do it, the more people will be willing to get on board and help. And that's a natural thing that actually happens. So in coming up to near the top of the hour, I thought Jack was going to make it back, but obviously
maybe his call ran over.
Yeah, that's call right over. So what do you got coming up next? You got anything special coming up?
That's a great question. I'm in talks with someone about potential. I don't reveal it yet because we haven't formalized it, but I'm in conversation about doing another podcast appearance.
Okay.
I'm very open to welcoming of opportunities to get out there and speak to people, connect with different audiences, and just share what I have to share. And so I'm excited about that opportunity. And right now, I'm just in the process of actually working on my business. I got invested in a business coach for myself. Coaches need coaches too.
Right.
So I'm trying to learn, the things I don't know about how to run a business. I'm 2 years into running my solo practice. I've never been a business owner before. And so I thought it was, time to invest in getting some support so I can generate new ideas, and learn how to be a better CEO of my own business. And that's a couple of things I'm looking at right now. I'm taking a diversity, equity, inclusion certification course through University of South Florida. I have a bunch of videos to catch up on, but I wanted to make sure to get it's a really important topic to me. And so I wanted to make sure to get some more formalized knowledge on the ins and outs of DEI, so I can speak more intelligently to it and really understand it at a deeper level and be more helpful when I, share content about this really critical and important topic. So those are a couple of things that are going on for me right now.
Yeah, that we're that's interesting because University of South Florida is my alma mater.
Oh,
And
right.
when I heard that was coming out of University of South Florida, I was completely shocked because that was not the environment when I went to school in the first part of the 80s. That was a long time ago, but that was is just surprising that that comes from that particular school. But yeah, but I hear it's a good program. There's several people that have been in my network that have taken it and very happy with it. So hey Jack, you're coming in at the end. Do you have any? Do you have anything going on that the people should know about and follow you?
The thing that's going on, and this is, I think people be really happy to hear this, is I'm definitely seeing the market improving, job market. So I'd say really within the last few months, it's picked up tremendously. I think it correlates, with the vaccines. It doesn't sound silly, but spring, you have a little nicer weather, you feel better. I don't know about you guys, but it feels a little bit of a change in the air. People feel a little better and less scared about the pandemic. Obviously we're still worried and concerned, but
Sure.
and I think with all the trillions of dollars that have been going into the economy, Biden has now a trillion, like a 2.3 trillion infrastructure program in there. So it seems that there's more jobs, more opportunities, and it looks like it's going to keep growing. And that's why I need to be rude by Panama, but I'm definitely getting more and more calls, for help and need people. Much more than it was like the beginning of the year, which was really super quiet. So for job seekers, I think now I don't want to overpromise, but it definitely feels that we're heading in the right direction, and more jobs, more opportunities, more growth. So so that's a good thing.
Yeah,
That's great.
That's what I'm noticing. So I'm just doing a lot of recruiting. Just keep my head down and plug it away.
yeah, I can imagine. So your number one tip for people to avoid traps and be successful in May.
That's a good question. I think maybe the number one thing is this: you have to go into everything with your eyes open, because despite not how the job market is better, it's still fraught with just challenges and headaches. Sometimes job descriptions aren't really what they're looking for. Some hiring managers aren't respected. The compensation might not be what they said. So you have to be careful. There's so much stuff that goes on that's really unfair. Rather than saying, "Hey, if you get this job, here's what you're gonna make." It's very squishy, so you gotta kind of stop and find out exactly how the penny scale is spinning your wheels. You want to make sure you know exactly what you could be doing. You want to know that are you going to be working remotely, are you going to be working at home? So I think the trap is just to avoid is to keep your eyes open, ask a lot of questions. Don't feel like you're being rude or by asking these questions, because it helps you and it helps them too.
Yeah.
And this way you can help avoid going, because I've seen this happen so many times. You go after weeks and months, and then you finally get an offer, and the person's like, "Wait a minute, like 30,000 less that I'm making. This is crazy. What's happened here?"
Right.
So you want to do that. You want to just be critical, ask questions, and just keep your eyes open. And I hate to say this because I want to be the cynical. But you always want to make sure, are they telling me the truth? Is this really what it is? Is this? Because you don't want to take things for granted at face value, and then you end up in a job that you hate, and you're not happy with, and not what you thought it would be.
Yeah, we talked about that a little bit last week. How there's some scams out there, and there are companies that are people are posting as companies, and companies like LinkedIn, and they take in applications, they make you go through this process, but it's a scam. So if something seems really too good to be true, you do a gut check and check it out and vet and ask questions and ask the right questions. Hopefully, thank Niatu for coming on and joining us today. I appreciate you and your great insight, especially about mental health, has been awesome, and especially your advice for job seekers at the end, particularly of note. It inspires a couple of articles rolling around in my mind, and then also join me and Jack. Well, Jack is going to be on the Friday show, the Modern Job Search Checklist. I hope Jack is still ready to join us there. But myself and Damian Burkle will be on with Jack, and we'll be hitting some topics up, and it's going to be a great discussion. So otherwise, thank all of you for joining us, and please watch the replay as you need it. It's here anytime, and I usually have articles that I update, and I update it so that it'll all be in one place. Look for that post here the next couple of days. In the meantime, thank you very much, and you guys have a great week. We'll see you next week with another guest. All right.
Pleasure meeting you too. Take it easy, everybody.
Take care.